In November 2008 Thanksgiving weekend, I went to visit my grandma, who lives in a condo in Katy, Texas. It's a gated condo in a very upscale neighborhood. The condo has a full-time nursing staff, 24-hour security, and is extremely well lit. Any visitors must sign in at the front office and must show picture ID. At about midnight, my grandma turned in for the night. I wasn't tired at all, so I decided to check some emails on my laptop. About 45 minutes later, someone began knocking on the door. Almost immediately, I felt quite uneasy. It didn't take long before I found out why. Whoever was knocking did so persistently. Most people knock a couple of times and wait for a response. Not them. They knocked incessantly, like they knew I was awake. As I approached the door to look through the peephole, I was extremely surprised to see two young kids standing there. At this point, my uneasiness turned into dread. At first glance, they looked like two normal boys. The oldest of the two must have been no more than 16, the younger one maybe 12. Thinking they must have gone to the wrong condo, I began to unlock the door. The feeling I had, though, it stopped me from sliding the chain off the door. I opened the door with the chain still on and said, "Yes, may I help you?" The older boy did all the talking while the younger one looked down at his feet.
"Miss,"
he said,
"can we please come in to use the phone? Our ride never came for us, and we need to call our parents."
Before I could even reply, the older boy looked straight into my eyes, and what I saw sent shivers down my spine. Even now. Because the corridors are so brightly lit, I was able to see the boy in vivid detail. The boy's eyes were solid black. Not a speck of white anywhere. Strangely, as we made eye contact, I almost felt compelled to open the door. But I didn't. As I stood there, staring at these kids, the older boy spoke again. He began to demand to be let in, saying that it would only take a few minutes and then they would be gone. Instead, I told them to go out to the front office. Someone could help them there. I shut the door, locked all the locks, and made a call to the front desk to let them know there were a couple of kids roaming the complex, knocking on doors and trying to get inside. I don't know when they left my door. I was too afraid to look. I do know that after a thorough search throughout the complex, reviewing the sign-in sheets, they found nothing. None of the residents had any young visitors. Who they were and where they came from is something I'd rather not know. I told my grandma what happened, but I left out the terrifying part. I worry for her safety on a daily basis. If you don't know who the Black-Eyed Kids are, here's a little backstory on them. They're kids, usually teenagers, who will ask permission to come into your house or car and ask for a ride or to use your phone. They cannot enter without your permission. However, there have been some stories where people have been caught or followed by them out in the open at night. Their eyes are completely black and bring along a feeling of fear and terror with them. So here's how my whole situation started out. It was the summer of 2012. I was 13 and me and my two best friends were hanging out at my house. We decided to watch a bunch of movies late at night, but we wanted some candy. We told my parents we were going to go to the gas station, which is a 5-minute walk from my house, to get some candy and chips. While we reached the final house on my street before turning to head towards the gas station, me and my immature friends decided to ding-dong ditch a house. If you don't know what that is, it's when you ring someone's doorbell and run away and hide. We rang the doorbell once, and the owner opened the door and closed it. We decided we wanted a better reaction, and I rang the door a second time. As I was running across the street, this huge feeling of adrenaline took me over, and I have no idea why. After I dove into the bushes into my hiding spot, I repositioned myself to look at the house I had just ding-dong ditched. This time, the man came out and looked around his yard. He began to cross the street and just stopped dead in his tracks. And I don't mean it was like a, hey, I'll just do with it later stop. It was like a, holy fuck stop. Me and my friends were ready in case we had to take off. But the man slowly started backing up and then hurried inside. We took this as an opportunity to leave, and we made our way to the gas station. We spent a while there talking about what happened, and how bizarre it was that he had just stopped. We bought some food and decided to head back to my house. On the way back, we saw a man walking towards us, ever so slowly. He was wearing a winter coat and skinny jeans. Yes, a winter coat and skinny jeans on a summer night. He was pretty far from us because the path we were walking is a very long straight path, so it's easy to see people coming from far away. By his height and his build, he was too young to be the man we ding-dong ditched. He was about our height, and judging by the fact that he was wearing skinny jeans, he was probably about 15 or 17. He had a very eerie look to him. The hood of his coat hid his face. As he approached closer, I started to get more uneasy and anxious. I spotted a path we could take to the side, and thought we could just take that and find another way home. The path just suddenly stopped after about 20 feet, and we were behind a hill. We decided to hide behind it and let the creepy man pass. I peeked over the top of the hill to see if he had passed, but the man was just standing there, looking straight ahead. Then I realized it was quiet. So quiet, no cars were passing and no crickets were chirping, just the breeze and my friend's breathing. I zoned out for a few seconds. Then, when I came back to reality, he was still standing there. And then he turned to look at me. Fear shot through my body, and I was terrified. I've never been so terrified. I had no idea why I was so scared. I almost shit myself, and I didn't even think about my friends when I just took off the other way and sprinted away from the man. To my luck, my friends followed. When we were a safe distance away, we decided to stop and catch our breath. I told them we could take a small tunnel that would let us loop around to my house. It was about a 15-minute walk, and we began walking up my street. We tried to hide in the shadows to avoid being seen if he was still around. But when we were about halfway to my house, I felt that uneasy feeling again, and this time, so did my friends. I turned around to see the same man following us. He was about 4 to 5 houses down behind us, so we had a pretty good distance between us. I told my friends that we were going to try and lose him, and that we were going to walk to another house so that he didn't find out where I live. Keep in mind that was mainly because I didn't want to get in trouble. Right after I finished telling them the plan, I turned around, and he was almost 20 fucking feet behind us. The fear and anxiety grew more and more the closer he got. There was no way someone could have caught up to us that fast without sprinting. He couldn't have run to catch up with us because we didn't hear any footsteps. It was still so quiet. We saw a car and we thought maybe if we signaled it to stop, he might leave us alone. The driver in the car sped past us and just ignored us completely. We were still wandering the neighborhood and finally came across a street with street lamps. As we passed under the street lamp, I turned to see if I could see the man's face. The split second he was under the light, I saw him. His eyes were pitch black, and right as I made that second of eye contact with him, I started freaking out. I started to breathe rapidly, and I could feel my eyes start to water because I was so fucking scared. A few minutes after I turned around, I heard him speak. His voice was deep and emotionless. He said,
"Don't be causing trouble."
That was it for me. I took off and headed home. My friends followed too. When we got back to my house, we tried entering as calmly as we could so my parents didn't get suspicious. We immediately headed downstairs and turned on a comedy movie to begin to calm down. We talked about what had happened, and my friends said they were scared shitless the whole time too. The only thing I cannot shake from my head is how fucking terrified I was. Whether it was some asshole fucking with us, or really a black-eyed kid, I will never truly shake that feeling of terror. As many things do, it started out innocently. My internet service provider used to have offices in a shopping center before they moved to their comparatively lush accommodations elsewhere. There was a drop box at the original location. The monthly bill was due, and so, there but for the grace of the net, I went. It was about 9:30 p.m. when I left. From my relatively isolated apartments, it's about 10 or 15 minutes to go downtown. Abilene has a population of about 110,000. Right next to Camelot Communications' old location is a $1.50 movie theater. At the time, the place was featuring the masterwork of modern film, Mortal Kombat. I drove by the theater on the way to the center proper and pulled into an empty parking space. Using the glow of the marquee to write out my check, I was startled to hear a knock on the driver's side window of my car. I looked over and saw 2 children staring at me from the street. I need to describe them with the one feature that I didn't realize until about halfway through the conversation. Both appeared to be in that semi-mystical stage of life children get into where you can't exactly tell their age. Both were boys, and my initial impression was that they were somewhere between 10 and 14 years old. Boy number 1 was the spokesperson. Boy number 2 didn't speak during the entire conversation. At least, not in words. Boy number 1 was slightly taller than his companion, wearing a pullover hooded shirt with a sort of gray checked pattern in jeans. I couldn't see his shoes. His skin was olive-colored, and he had a curly, medium-length brown hair. He exuded a quiet air of confidence. Boy number 2 had pale skin with a trace of freckles. His primary characteristic seemed to be looking around nervously. He was dressed in a similar manner to his companion, but his pullover was light green in color. His hair was sort of a pale orange. They didn't appear to be related, at least not directly. Oh great, I thought. They're gonna hit me up for money. And then the air changed. I've explained this before, but for the benefit of any new lurkers out there, right before I experience something strange, there's a change in perception that comes about which I describe in the above manner. It's basically enough time to know it's too late. So there I was, filling out a check in my car, which was still running, and in a sudden panic over the appearance of the 2 little boys. I was confused, but an overwhelming sense of fear and unearthliness rushed in nonetheless. The spokesman smiled, and the sight for some inexplicable reason chilled my blood. I could feel fight or flight responses kicking in. Something, I knew instinctually, was not quite right. But I didn't know what it could possibly be. I rolled down the window very, very slightly and asked, "Yes?" The spokesman smiled again, broader this time. His teeth were very, very white.
Hey, mister. What's up? We have a problem,
he said. His voice was that of a young man, but his diction, quiet, calm, and something I still couldn't put my finger on, made my desire to flee even greater.
You see, my friend and I want to see the films, but we forgot our money,
he continued.
We need to go to our house to get it. Want to help us out?
Okay. Journalists are required to talk to lots of people, and that includes children. I've seen and spoken to lots of them, and here's usually how that goes. Mister? Can I see that camera? I won't break it or anything, I promise. My dad has a camera, and he lets me hold it sometimes, I guess. And I took a picture of a dog. It wasn't very good, because I got my finger in the way, and adding some feet shuffling, or body swaying, you've got a typical kid talking to a stranger. In short, they're usually apologetic. People generally teach children that when they talk to adults, they're usually bothering them for one reason or another, and they should at least be polite. This kid was no way fitting the mold. His command of language is incredible, and he showed no signs of fear. He spoke as if my help was a foregone conclusion. When he grinned, it was as if he was trying to say,
I know something, and you're not going to like it, but the only way you're going to find out what it is will be to do what I say.
Well, was the best reply I could offer. Now, here's when it starts to get strange. The quiet companion looked at the spokesman with a mixture of confusion and guilt on his face. He seemed in some way shocked, not with his friend's brusque manner, but that I didn't just immediately open the door. He eyed me nervously. The spokesman seemed a bit perturbed, too. I was still registering something wrong with both.
Come on, mister,
the spokesman said again, smooth as silk. Car salesmen could learn something from this kid.
No, we just want to go to our house, and we're just 2 little boys.
That really scared me. Something in the tone and diction again set off alarm bells. My mind was frantically trying to process what it was perceiving about the 2 figures that was wrong. Was all I could manage. I felt myself digging my fingernails into the steering wheel. What movie were you going to see? I asked finally.
Mortal Kombat, of course,
the spokesperson said. The silent one nodded in affirmation, standing a few paces behind. Oh, I said. I stole a quick glance at the marquee and at the clock by my car. Mortal Kombat had been playing for at least an hour, the last showing of the evening, too. The silent one looked increasingly nervous. I think he saw my glances and suspected that I might be detecting something was not above board.
Come on, mister. Let us in. We can't get into your car until you do, you know,
the spokesman said soothingly.
Just let us in, and we'll be gone before you know it. We'll go to our mother's house.
We locked eyes. To my horror, I realized my hand must have strayed towards the door lock, which was still engaged. I was in the process of opening it. I pulled it away, probably a bit too violently, but it did force me to look away from the children. I turned back. Er, I offered weakly, and then my mind snapped into sharp focus. For the first time, I noticed their eyes. They were coal black. No pupil, no iris, just two staring orbs reflecting the red and white light of the marquee. At that point, I knew my expression had betrayed me. The silent one had a look of horror on his face and a combination that seemed to indicate the impossible had just happened, and we've been found out. The spokesman, on the other hand, wore a mask of anger. His eyes glittered brightly in the half-bright light.
Come on, mister,
he said.
We won't hurt you. You have to let us in. We don't have a gun.
That last statement scared the living hell out of me, because at that point his tone was plainly saying, we don't need a gun. I noticed my hand shooting down towards the gear shift. The spokesman's final words contained an anger that was complete and whole, and yet contained in some respects a tone of panic.
We can't come in until you tell us it's okay. Let us in.
I ripped the car into reverse and tore out of the parking lot. I noticed the boys in my peripheral vision, and I stole a quick glance back. They were gone. The sidewalk by the theater was deserted. I drove home in a heightened state of panic. Had anyone attempted to stop me, I would have run on through and faced the consequences later. I bolted into my house, scanning all around, including the sky. What did I see? Maybe nothing more than some kids looking for a ride, and some really funky contacts. Yeah, right. A friend of mine suggested they were vampires with the old let us in bit and that we'll go see our mother thing. I'm still not sure what they were. So, it had been a slow trick-or-treat night in our neighborhood that evening, which is pretty odd in itself. We usually have kids from different areas dropped off in ours, and have a constant parade at our door. That night, I'd say we had no more than 8 or 10 groups of kids come by the entire night. It was about 9:30 p.m., and my husband and I were sitting in our family room watching some of those ghost shows based on supposedly actual events. Like I said, I don't believe in that stuff, but I do like a good ghost story now and then, and it was Halloween and all. We hadn't had any activity at the door in half an hour, and it was getting late, so we decided to turn the porch light off and let our dog Chloe out of her crate. Chloe is an American bulldog and is usually very docile. We only put her in her crate because we were afraid she'd try to get out and play with all the kids, and I didn't want to have to chase after her down the street. Also, we didn't want her to scare away any of the kids because she might look a little intimidating to the younger ones. So I turned the outside light off and let Chloe out, and she followed me back to the couch and laid down at my feet. It was getting close to 10 p.m. when my husband decided he'd had enough fun for the night and was going to go upstairs, take a shower, and get ready for bed. After all, it was Thursday, and he still had to get up early the next day. My teenage son was out with friends at a local haunted house and wasn't expected back for another hour or so that left me alone on the couch with Chloe. Now, just because I don't believe doesn't mean those shows don't freak me out a bit. And being alone now, watching, I'd have to say I was kind of on edge, as it were. It wasn't long after I heard the upstairs water for the shower turn on when there came a light at the front door. My initial reaction was, what the hell, really? It's almost 10, go home. But soon an uneasy feeling came over me. Why the knock? Our doorbell glows, and in the dark and without the porch light on, it would have been extremely obvious to anyone there. I paused. I couldn't really just ignore it. Our front door has a big, beveled glass panel, and anybody right at the door could see in enough to see someone was in the family room watching TV. It would be pretty rude for me to just sit there and not answer it. Again from the door. I glanced down at Chloe, and she's gone. My gaze followed the usual path to the front door, expecting her to be on her way there as she normally does. Nothing. She wasn't there. I stood up and looked around the room better, and found her, crouching by the back door like she was wanting out. However, she never asks to go out like that. She always comes and licks my hand or puts her head on my knee. This was totally out of character for her, and heightened my anxiety. "Chloe, crate," I said. She just turned to look back at me like, "Hell no, lady, I ain't moving." I yelled up to my husband, but if he was already in the shower, I knew there was no chance of him hearing me. About that time, a car drove down our street and cast just enough light on the door to where I could see the silhouettes of 2 small children through the glass. I instantly felt relief. It was just some kids, probably a couple of my neighbors on their way back home and wanted to stop by and show me their costume or something. I headed to the door and looked back to make sure Chloe wasn't going to follow. What a great watchdog, I thought to myself as she just sat there. I turned on the porch light when I got to the front door, and sure enough, I could see through the glass that it was a couple of pretty small kids. A little late for such young ones, I thought, and began to wonder what kind of parents would let their kids run the streets that late at night. I only opened up the door enough to where I could block Chloe's escape if she decided to grow some balls, which was only about 2 feet. What struck me immediately as odd was the kids weren't wearing any costumes. They were just in normal street clothes. No customary trick-or-treat either. I began to feel very uneasy again. It was a girl and a boy. The girl, to my left, was older. I'd say about 11 or 12. I could tell she was blonde, but I couldn't make out any distinct features as our lights are from high above and on columns at the front of the porch, so most of the light was coming from behind them. I had not opened the door wide enough for any light from the inside to hit them directly. The boy was younger and about a foot shorter. I'd say 8 or 9, and he looked to have light brown hair. The girl very politely spoke up.
Ma'am, can we please come inside and use your phone to call our mom?
As she spoke, something in the pit of my stomach was telling me something was wrong. What kid, even at that age, doesn't have a cell phone of their own these days? I couldn't remember the last time I'd had anybody ask to use my home phone. Hun? Don't you have a phone of your own you can call your mom on? I asked. This was when things got really weird. Both kids turned to look at one another like they were going to say something to one another. But they never spoke. They both turned back to me and the girl said,
Ma'am, my cell phone battery doesn't have enough charge left in it. Can we please come inside and call our mother? We're alone out here. My brother is scared.
I have to admit, there were 2 competing feelings going on inside me. First, that of a mother's heart that wanted to help these 2 small children get to their mom. The other, a sinking fear in my gut that was keeping the other feeling at bay. It was then that I noticed during the short conversation I'd already opened the door an extra few inches, which I was completely unaware of doing. I stopped. Honey, why don't you give me your mother's number, and I can call her myself? Another pause, and they looked again at one another. After a short moment, they turned back to me, and the girl said,
Ma'am, my little brother has to use your bathroom. Can we please come inside while you call our mom?
And with that last statement, the little girl moved closer towards the door, like she was going to just walk on by me. As she did, she stepped into the light coming from inside the house, and I got my first real look at her. Solid, jet black eyes. That's all I could see. That motherly instinct was gone and replaced by terror I don't think I've ever felt in my life. I could feel every hair on my arms and the back of my neck standing at attention. I closed the door to where just my face was able to stick out. The little girl stopped again and pleaded.
Please, ma'am, we're really scared and alone out here. We have to come inside. Please help us.
Then, like on cue, both kids began to whimper and cry. That's when the fear took over, and I shut and locked the door. I'll call your mom if you give me the number, I shouted through the door. But I'm not letting you in my house. Part of me wanted to run upstairs to my husband. But the bigger part didn't want to lose track of where they were. That would have freaked me out even more to not know where they were. After what seemed like forever, but probably was only a few seconds, I decided to call my neighbor that lives across the street. As I made my way to the other side of the table by our couch to my phone, I glanced at the back door. Chloe was nowhere to be found. We later found her in the guest room under the bed. When I got my phone and started to look for his contact info, it was only then that the kids stepped away from the door and began to walk around the street. As they did, I walked to the door to get a better look to see where they went, still not calling my neighbor. If you get close enough to the glass, you can see out enough to make out people's shapes, but you can't see much detail. Of course, standing that close to the door would make it pretty obvious to anyone outside looking in that you're there. From the door, I could see that the kids were still standing on the street lamp nearest my house, staring at me. As I lifted the phone up to my ear after calling, only then did the kids start walking down our street. I met my neighbor out under the lamp once he was out there, but the kids were nowhere to be seen. Like I said, I don't believe in any of this stuff, and I've never even heard about black-eyed kids before talking to my friend. What I really think is these kids were just out yanking people's chains on Halloween night. But I will say this for them, they were good. Really good. They scared the shit out of me and my dog. Hey guys, Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you all for watching the video, especially if you made it to the end. If you liked the video, please feel free to like and subscribe to stay up to date with the latest content on the channel. If you have any constructive criticism, please feel free to leave a comment below and tell me what I can do to improve, because I'm always looking to provide you guys with better and better content. Also, if you have any stories you'd like me to read or any stories that you want to send in that are your personal stories, please feel free to send them to either my Facebook, Twitter, or my Gmail account. All of them are in the description of the video below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.
Portis Media.
Good evening all, and welcome. The brave military men and women of every nation often have many difficult things they need to do. This of course is compounded if some of the stuff they have to deal with is paranormal, which is what you're about to find out now. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new here for 3 videos a week, as well as checking out our app for over 3,500 extra stories to listen to at your leisure. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My mum was in the Air Force for 23 years, and this is what she told me. She was a medic and worked in hospitals, and worked at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany in the 90s, and she said there were a few areas of the hospital that had seen countless numbers of veteran patients and deaths where the faculty got really unwelcome vibes from, or where they'd see shadows or hear voices and footsteps. But this one time, she was in a certain wing of the hospital where she frequently worked, and she needed to go to the 4th floor, and she did so with a fellow airman since it was required that they travel in pairs, the buddy system. So they walked into the elevator, pressed 4, and oddly enough the elevator went past 4, then came back down and kept going up and down without ever opening the doors. Then when it finally opened on 4, they looked out into the open doors and saw a floor of the hospital that was completely unfamiliar. Now my mum knew this area inside and out, but said that it was a floor she had never seen before. It even looked like it could have been from a different period of time. It was completely empty. Her and her teammate didn't say anything or make a move to step out. I think they both felt that was wrong. Then the doors closed. The elevator skipped around a few more times, and then she came back to floor 4, and it was completely back to normal, the way they knew it to be. Her teammate said, "What just happened?" She replied with, "I dunno." And they never spoke of it to each other again. I used to work for the US Air Force Munition System, code 2WOX1. Basically, I was just towing trailers back and forth all night. Well, one night I was alone checking a trailer behind our conventional munition shop before grabbing it and towing it away. The trailer was parked next to the fence, and I was on the side opposite the fence. As I moved my flashlight to check the tires, it caught my eyes outside the wire. So I swept the light up and looked up for 5 minutes, trying to figure out what I'd seen, thinking it was like a coyote or something since we were in New Mexico. I figure I must have spooked it, so I turned off my light, finished my hookup and left. The next day I'm talking to a buddy in conventional, and they tell me they found tracks all over behind the fence next to the building, and had to report it to the security forces, since there wasn't really a road back there or anything, as it's a secure area. Then the guy, who happened to be a Native American, tells me this story about skinwalkers and how they like to spy on people who are alone and take their souls and stuff. And I did the damnedest to never be alone there again. You know, with a base this size, there's native burial grounds that we bulldozed at some point, and definitely pissed something off. I was in Navy boot camp in Orlando. I was alone on watch in our company's barracks compartment. I was checking all of the windows because the CC liked to unlock 1 or 2 to make sure we checked them all. That put me between the racks, or bunk beds on the wall. I caught movement down the middle open area of the compartment. A flash of white. White shoes meant brand new recruits. We had been there long enough to know we were wearing our black Oxfords. I went between the racks to the middle so that I could see who had come into the compartment. The outside door definitely hadn't opened, and I would have heard the door by the inside stairwell. The door to the laundry area was locked. Standing across the open area, by the other row of racks, was a girl with dark curly hair, wearing the same female utilities as me, light blue shirt, black pants, and was wearing the white tennis shoes, which meant she'd been there only a few weeks. She looked at me and then she wasn't there. No place for her to go. We were in the middle of the compartment, yards from the door, and nowhere to hide. I didn't see her move. She was just there one moment and the next, gone. Only saw her for a heartbeat or two. Spookier still, years later, someone was telling us about doing roving patrol watch at boot camp and how they kept finding a pair of white sneakers in the locked laundry room of an empty compartment. It freaked her out. They said that they would then put the shoes outside on the breezeway, then lock the door, but the shoes would be thumping in the dryer when they came back around. She said the red lights always looked darker in there. They'd do their checks and leave as fast as they could. They thought one of the CCs was playing a joke with the shoes. I asked which building, which wing, which floor, and it was my old compartment, exactly the same place I had seen that girl. My grandfather was a pilot in the Turkish Air Force way back, and being part of NATO, they sent them to Canada to attend Air Force Academy. Just to give you some context, he is very uptight and serious, often the reason being a soldier comes into play. He is the reason why I know a lot of astrophysics. He guided me to science and facts his entire life. Rest in peace, Grandpa. Anyway, he told me he and the rest of the school, including the flight instructors, witnessed a UFO hovering above the main building. He says it came too close to the ground and it was basically impossible not to notice. Then, just as baffled as people are, the UFO shot up straight almost instantly. Must be pulling G-force that would have easily killed a human being. I never saw a UFO with my own eyes. Every object I've ever seen in the sky had an easy explanation. Some took longer to realize, but now it comes to me very naturally. I'm a little skeptic about the whole aliens visiting Earth thing, but science says it's not impossible. Fermi's paradox can easily be solved. I also spoke with my mother, as it was her father, and she gave me a few more details that I can remember. It was during the winter of 1958, and after the meal my grandfather didn't like to talk about these things in general. Only after I pushed him hard did he spill more details, but I forgot some of them. Thanks, Mum. I was at Camp Leatherneck, Helmand Province, Afghanistan. We were leaving my room, which was a large room with 8 other guys, to head to the designated smoking area at around 10 p.m. It was dark and clear. I lit up my cigarette as I was passing through the T barriers, and when I got back on the other side, I saw about 10 or so Marine/Army men looking up at the sky pointing. I looked up and saw 3 red dots in the sky, about the size of what you'd see on an aeroplane, but far apart in a triangle formation. So 1 light at each angle point. We're all looking up, and a second set of lights appear, a little to the left of this one. It was super weird, and at one point the lights from the first set get closer together, then apart again, then completely vanish. To this day, I don't know what it was. It was really cool to witness though. 2003 in Baghdad. My unit came in May, right after the initial push. We took over the compound that looked like an Iraqi base. Anyway, we were setting up sleeping quarters and my unit takes over the old medical building. We can clearly see blood on the stairs, and I'm not talking sprinkles. I'm talking puddles of blood from the unit that had come before us and clearly saw combat in there. A few days go by and I'm laying down on my cot, trying to sleep, when suddenly I feel someone stare at me. I look up and see a soldier that clearly wasn't American. It was an old Iraqi soldier just standing there in the middle of the room. I'm sure it wasn't just me being half asleep, because another one of my friends mentioned it a few days later. It was profoundly creepy. I'm in the Navy, and about 15 years ago I was standing watch in a submarine engine room. We were underway, and I can't for the life of me remember where to or from, or if we were just making circles. It was the mid-watch, and I sat down to catch up on some logs. That's when I heard a woman's voice. This was long before we had women on subs, and felt the hairs on my neck stand straight up. I got up and looked around to find the others, who were all talking or doing their daily tasks. I thought maybe I had dozed off and dreamt it. I sat back down and heard it again, and it sounded like it was coming from outside the hatch I was sitting under. I said screw this out loud, and went to just be around the other guys on watch. I still get chills just thinking about it now. This is my dad's story. After he was done in Vietnam, he was stationed at an Air Force base in Greenland. They had bad blizzards often there, and when they came through, the base shut down and every section of the barracks would take roll call. These blizzards are intense. There were cables running between all buildings you attached to a person with carabiners, so if there was a sudden whiteout, you didn't get lost and die. They had people die literally 20 meters from shelter because they got lost in bad weather and froze. He said for about 5 months, every time they locked down for weather, they would hear horrendous screaming outside. Everyone was accounted for, so they didn't risk sending anyone out to investigate, and they wrote it off as an animal. However, every time it was heard, the engine room would be wrecked. Tools everywhere, paperwork all over the floor, tables and toolboxes knocked over. Even one time, a 1,000-pound jet engine had been lifted from its workbench crane and smashed almost 30 feet away. The hangars and engine room had cameras covering every single possible entrance with spotlights that made them clear even in a whiteout. No animals nor people were ever seen entering or leaving those buildings. And then one day, it just stopped. This was not something that they just shrugged off at all. It cost a lot of money and threw a wrench in at least one surveillance routine, which caused a lot of brass from the DoD and CIA to fire down the base commander's neck. This facility, beyond military function, served as a base for a lot of civilian research as well. There was a full investigation using all manner of scientists, engineers, and specialists, and they came up with no satisfactory explanation for what was going on. I do not believe in the paranormal, nor did my father, but this is the only spooky type of story he has from his 22 years of service. No one knows what happened. It was very strange in either way. Hundreds of people wrote reports and documented this. It wasn't some grease monkey scratching their heads and randomly guessing. As I said, I spoke to my mum. These are the things that I missed. After one of these occasions, the U2 in the shop had all of its electronics turned on. Many of the systems in this plane were specially built for this airframe and this particular cruise mission. The systems were complex and archaic. Very few people knew how to operate this machinery, and the only ones on base that could were 2 engineers and its crew. It wasn't a simple matter of hitting buttons and flipping switches and stuff. Another time, 3 barrels of hydraulic fluid vanished and were never found. They doubted the screaming noise was wind because it came in short, irregular bursts, and winds never produced these sounds again. They theorized it was a polar bear, but if it was, its coincidental timing was extremely uncanny. Lastly, Control picked up a bunch of weird interference and anomalous readings that, again, had the uncanny timing of happening only when this was going on, but they were never able to reproduce these errors in a controlled manner. It's creepy, bizarre, and may or may not be supernatural. I'll leave that down to your own judgment. I was in the Navy and did 6 months in the Mediterranean. I saw a lot of empty boats, but also small boats full of people and other refugee-related events. The one thing that will always stand out, though, was the day we cruised past a dead body. It 100% looked like nothing I'd ever seen in a movie. It was like cottage cheese wearing clothes. I assume given the region that the person's skin was much darker before they passed. After death, they were severely bloated and white. Had they not had shorts and a shirt on, I'd have never recognized this as a person. I've also been on Liberty in Greece and passed dead bodies on the beach. The desperation of the refugees to cross the sea, I swear, is something else. A buddy of mine was stationed at Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa in the aughties. It was a regular day full of standard base activity indoors and out, when the sirens went off, followed by a warning for all staff to report to the base's mess hall. My friend and everyone else were quite confused but followed orders. Upon arrival at the hall, they found it was full of the base staff, with a uniformed officer taking roll. The base commander settled everyone down and advised them that everyone was just taking a short break, that there was nothing to worry about, and that everyone would be back to work shortly. Everyone sat at the long lunch table scratching their heads and discussing what could be up. This particular room in the hall was interior and had no windows. Once the roll was completed and everyone accounted for, the commander left and soldiers carrying automatic rifle closed the doors to the hall and stood inside them at attention, essentially stopping anyone from leaving. This raised the chatter quite a bit, but nobody panicked. Only a few minutes later, an incredibly loud engine sound could be heard approaching the base, as whatever was making the noise sounds lands, and it shook the entire island. Framed photos fell off the walls and trophies in glass cases are shaken over. The engine hum and shaking then cease. Chatter again rises sharply, as speculation about what the hell is going on increases. After about an hour, the noise starts up again, and the island shakes again, and whatever it was takes off and quickly fades. Shortly after, the base's commander enters and says everyone can get back to work, warning them not to discuss today's break and simply forget about it. When I asked him what he thought it was, he immediately suggested that it was some sort of classified skunk weapon spy plane, maybe the Aurora needing to land for emergency repairs or refueling. Of course, he said, since they kept us all from seeing it, we'll truly never know. We were stationed in Okinawa. Oh man, it's a goldmine of stuff. Driving through a tunnel coming back from Churimari Aquarium, I woke up to my friends freaking out. There was this phantom moped that zipped by with this girl on the back, and she left a trail of long flowing black hair like the Grudge ghost, oily looking flowing hair. I thought I was dazed, but we talked about it the next day. I think the story was some girl was kidnapped by guys on mopeds driving through the tunnel when they crashed, construction or another car, and I think they were decapitated or something terrible. Also, I thought I saw a ghost in my room and some other areas. I drank a lot back then, so I passed it off. Kadena was rumored to have a lot of ghosts, Gate 3 I think. I thought it was just an excuse to keep it closed. They also have a bunch of buildings which are allegedly haunted that they still use. I think one of the marine bases supposedly has the ghost of a samurai run up and down the streets. Just Google Haunted Okinawa and you'll find a bunch of stories. They were good times. Former USGC here. I saw a ghost and some creepy stuff happen when we were removing the old Fresnel lens from the Presque Isle Light in Michigan. Also, I've seen some weird and creepy lights in St. Elmo's Fire near the old Washango Light. Compasses and radios all quit, radar and GPS wouldn't work either. The light near Sturgeon Bay is haunted as well, and we stayed at the light near Two Rivers, and the whole family saw the ghost. There are several lights in the Great Lakes that are open to active reserve and retired military members as vacation rentals. We stayed at Rawley Point Lighthouse and the Sherwood Point Lighthouse. They have visitor logs that now look like a diary, and multiple stories in there are about the hauntings, dating back to at least the 70s. I know that Sherwood Point, at the very least, is quite haunted. When I was in Israel, I saw something. My folks and I were chilling about 10 p.m. enjoying the cool evening looking at stars when they became obscured by a giant black triangular shape that passed over. I said, "What the hell is that?" We all looked and waved, and it spotlighted the entire city block as if to say hello back. Or was it getting a better look at us? It made a quiet hum as it passed and turned west, moving very slowly. I worked in Arlington National Cemetery while I was in the army. The tomb guard always talked about seeing or just hearing soldiers marching some nights. We were cataloging graves one night when I thought I saw a soldier in my team up ahead, so I called over to him. He answered from behind me. When I looked back, the other soldier was gone. I'm a skeptic, and I believe everything paranormal has a real-world explanation, but I'm still trying to figure that one out. I was taking my shift in the guard tower at our fire base in Afghanistan one clear night. Through my night vision, I saw something hovering above an LP/OP we had about a kilometer from our base. It appeared to have lights on the edges of a triangular craft, and it looked like it was dropping flares over the guys. However, without the night vision, I couldn't see the craft or the flares at all. I radioed in, and they said that they couldn't see anything. The craft and the flares then vanished. I also saw a very large circular craft without lights pass over FOB Ghazni that was being chased by a bunch of choppers, and a guy that glowed when viewed through my night vision stepped into a bush in an empty field and vanished. I grew up in an old Victorian-era boarding house in Ivor, South Carolina. Everything about that town and house and its surrounding area is just creepy. We saw and felt all kinds of weirdness in there, but that's only the beginning of my experiences. Hot spots, cold spots, apparition of a man who looked like he was dressed in a suit and a fedora, who always was with a young woman who was wearing a dress like an old school teacher from when the house used to be a boarding house, and the ghosts of people that had been lynched from an old pecan tree in my backyard. I'm used to seeing some messed up stuff at this point, and that's only part of it. Fast forward to 2014. I was enlisted into the US Navy and got assigned TAD to USS Sturret in between my A and C schools. I was coming back to the ship one night, and I see someone aloft. That's not right, no one's supposed to be aloft at night, but somebody's probably got an okay from it somewhere, so whatever. I see them walking around, then I get up to the brow, look up, and see no one. Guess they went in already. Didn't think anything about it, and the next morning we go underway. I went up to the smoke deck late one night, on that underway, and on my way there I see the upper half of a guy's face. I could see coveralls with his second-class crows visible through the porthole window of one of the airlock doors that you go through to go outside. I make eye contact and shuffle over to let him in. He shuffled over too. Okay, I'll open it, guy, whatever. I open it, look around but don't see him. Maybe he went for another cigarette. I climb up there and see some other people in the dark, faces occasionally lit by the cherry from their cigarette, but I don't see the guy. I ask if anyone saw someone come up, because there was a guy that was about to hop through the airlock, but didn't. I just wanted to make sure he was okay. You saw him too, huh? Yeah, of course I did, I say. Is the guy here or what? Do we need to call man overboard? No, he's dead. Maybe not if we don't turn this around. No, another guy goes. I mean, he hung himself. What? Apparently, he was a Control 2 that got into a love triangle that went bad and he couldn't deal. So yeah, that happened. I was told to come over here and look up by one of the guys, and was shown the exact light he hung himself from. Apparently sometimes you can see him walking around there at night, and you always feel the cold spot right there. And I was shown where. Screw me. Anything else I ought to know, I asked? Yeah, let me show you Andrew Sterrett's sword. It'll always shock you though, no matter how many times you touch it. Or if you touch something metal beforehand. Apparently he killed a kid with it. Yeesh. Oh, you're a sonar tech, right? Yeah, man, I'm in R-dive right now, but yeah. Okay, go ask Chief Moon about the skid. I think she's in sonar right now anyway. Okay, I'll bite. I head back down and go to the sonar room. Chief Moon was there and I ask her about the skid. Ah, hell no, that place freaks me out. Okay, but why? What's the story? I want to know. Well, I went down there one time to get pressure readings because I was an STG-1 at the time and was on duty. I saw a guy standing in the corner, back facing the ladder. I asked if he was okay and he didn't reply, so I booked it. Screw that. I never went down there at night. But wasn't somebody just messing with you? It sure as hell wasn't anyone that I recognized, so you tell me. And that's why I stay the hell off there. I left a bit after that, and figured that I'd check up on the skids anyway to see for myself. I got down there, and when I touched the hatch, I felt the same weirdness from when I was a kid. And I went in anyway. Cut on the light and didn't see anything, but still felt that something was off. Everybody else that I asked said that down there is creepy, and they don't go anywhere near it unless they really have to. Those are just a few things I saw there. My old ship, USS Princeton, chased a UFO off once, off the coast of Baja, and I saw some sort of submerged disc thing on sonar once. That, and any time that we'd go over shipwrecks, I would get a weird feeling out on the smoke deck. Anyway, that's enough for now. I've got to get back to work. I'm an Air Force member. At my old base, McChord Air Force Base, there is a building known as the Castle, and it is the main hub for the base. I worked there for 4 years, and I experienced something on 2 occasions. The first, I had stayed up late to finish some work and emails, and I was the last one in the office. From down the hall I heard talking that sounded like my supervisor and another airman speaking. I walked down that way on my way out to say bye, and as I turned the corner the talking stopped and no one was there. I hightailed it out of there. The second happened at my desk. I had gone in on a weekend to work on a project, and while sitting at my desk I heard a male's voice whisper out, "Get out," into my ear. I was completely alone, and I have never been more freaked out in my life. I never worked in that office again. I was stationed while in the Navy at El Centro, California. I was part of the Auxiliary Security Forces back then for a few years. One night, during force protection drills, which we were required to man the base as if we were being attacked, wearing that huge Darth Vader-like blue brain bucket along with your best friend's sidearm M16 and other LARPing-like gear. I got lucky and stood an 8-hour watch with a friend. As we were patrolling the water treatment section of the base, we started hearing what appeared to be drums or war drums in the distance, coming from the north. This base is in the middle of nowhere, so we chalked it up to machinery echoes at 3 a.m. Right? While we were roving back south, we could hear it coming from the south, so we stopped and started to watch the south and west side of the base because it appeared to be following us. So we radioed dispatch for assistance as the drums started sounding louder and closer. A single unit showed up with a DoD civilian police officer and an actual master of arms and pointed all their SUV lights towards the area where it appeared the noise was coming from. We waited about 20 minutes before silence came over. Right after that, the drum beats re-emerged from the north side. We freaked out a little bit, but at this point we just went back to kicking rocks while the unit went to investigate. We started putting 2 and 2 together and just let it go. It wasn't every night you could hear it, and it was mostly random. The following story takes place in Fort Dix, New Jersey. My aunt, grandmother, and also my mother, uncle, and grandfather, when they were all alive, all claimed there was something demonic there, especially in and around the officer housing. Apparently, a mess of officers didn't want to stay in the provided houses, and the enlisted asked if they could swap. Grandpa was enlisted and heard about this, and moved himself and his family into one of the houses. Everyone claims that even in the summer, the house wouldn't get above the low 60s. The brightest light bulbs would hardly provide much light, and the dog refused to go into the basement, and the cat litter pans would be flipped. My mother swore she would see shadow people watching her from around corners, and my aunt had one push her while she was in the shower. My uncle had the choice to either have the entire basement to himself or the small office as his bedroom, and he picked the first option. He began sleeping in the living room after getting his feet grabbed when he would go down the basement steps. He mentioned after having a fight with Grandpa that something kept pushing its fingers into his bruises, and he woke up with more cuts and scrapes than he went to bed with. Everyone would always have some sort of scratch or bruise that they didn't remember getting. Grandma and Grandpa mentioned knowing that it was going on, but tried to continue on without acknowledging it. Last year I was roughly 50 miles off the coast of New York, and I saw one extremely bright light in the sky which I assumed was a light from the shore. When it dawned on me that it didn't make sense due to how far offshore was, I grabbed the binoculars for a closer look. Crazy thing was, I could not figure out if this was 2 miles or 20 miles away. It looked like a giant, burning ball in the sky, wasn't very high, and I just knew it wasn't a plane. I thought maybe some military flare exercise, but ruled that out because it was not descending. After about 5 to 10 minutes of trying to figure out what the damn thing was, it was gone. Just myself and one other guy were standing there, watching on the bridge. It was around 3 to 4 a.m. We were so confused and stunned when it was just gone. It didn't burn up or slowly fade, just flat out disappeared. I am a Canadian Army officer. I work in a garrison that's been around for a while. It has actually been in service since before World War II. In one of the old hangars, which is now demolished, there used to be airplanes there. We had our mess, bars where we would grab a drink, and in the officers' mess, there was a Bible, a very old Bible, that no one knew exactly where it came from, but it looked old. Everyone that has worked around that Bible has heard or seen weird stuff. It started with the following routine. Every once in a while, we would find this old Bible thrown around in a complete mess. The Bible, which was next to 2 other more recent ones, would be in a glass display which was in a locker. We found it super weird, but there's a civilian airport literally next to our base, so we thought maybe the vibrations or airplanes caused this. We even changed the direction of the camera to try and catch if someone was messing with the Bible, but we never saw anything. Then one day we had to do some renos, and there were these huge cylindrical paper towers, very, very heavy, and for some reason I can't quite remember, we left the 3 Bibles on the top of one of the cylinders. Well, the day after the cylinders were down, they were thrown, and the Bibles were thrown not far from where the cylinders fell. I'm talking 6'1" cylinders, and that cylinder was heavy as hell. In another occurrence, there were 2 female NCOs working near the stand, where the Bible was, with 2 others on a Tuesday night shift. The floor was made of a kind of old wood/plastic, which our boots made it very easy to know where someone was coming. So the 2 girls, Master Corporal and a Corporal, were in different rooms. The Master Corporal was focused when she suddenly hears boots running right next to her, close to the door entrance. Of course, the light was low. The building was very old and never had great lighting. She turned super fast and asked the corporal if it was her, that she just passed next to her. She yelled in the other room that it wasn't. No need to say that they left the building really fast. There have been a lot of occurrences like that. There's even a captain that refused to touch it and made privates move it instead. The building was demolished maybe 3 years ago now, and we never heard back from that devilish book. My old barrack room in the Marines was a living nightmare. I have a lot of stories from it, but I want to share this first occurrence. So I was stationed on Camp Pendleton at the time, and grew up near there, so I'd often go and see my parents at their house on weekends, and even some weeknights. If I went home, then I'd wake up at around 4:30 to 5 in the morning, and drive back to base for PT. If I got there early with time to spare, I'd take a quick nap in the barracks room. This was one of those mornings. I shared the barracks room with a roommate, but he was home on leave at the time. Anyway, I was napping in my room when I felt someone shake me awake. I sat up in bed a little confused because my very first thought was that my mum was shaking me awake at home because I'd overslept. But I was in my barrack room, so I just kind of brushed it off and laid back down. I was laying on my side with my back to the wall. Shortly after I closed my eyes, I felt something sit on the edge of the bed in front of my feet. I thought my brains must have been playing tricks on me, when I felt this thing get up, walk around the bed, and sit behind my feet. So, it's now sitting between my feet and the wall. I'm very creeped out. I'm still laying there wide awake, but eyes closed, not really reacting. The thing then starts crawling up the bed, like I'm feeling the bed indenting as their hands and knees move upwards. In my head, I'm telling myself to let it get to your head and see what happens. But it gets to my belly button, I freak out. I throw my hand over there and flip the light on, trying to rationalize it, thinking it's a cat or a rat. But of course there's nothing. So I just take off and drive to the parking lot, where I have a nap in my car instead. I spent about 6 years in the Navy, and had quite a few odd paranormal experiences while there. I lived in 2 different barracks while I was there, and had friends in another building. All 3 of them had weird goings-on. The first one was in a room shared with one other girl. My bed was against the left-hand wall, and on the right-hand wall were the doors to the bathroom and a double set of closets with mirrors on the doors. I remember waking up more than once that night to see what I thought was the dark outline of a shadow in the mirror, sort of standing close to the bed. On other nights, I could see a shadowy figure moving in the bathroom. The second building was much nicer. I had a room to myself, but shared a joint kitchen and bathroom with the other person. Though I didn't see anything in that place, she and I could both hear things moving around the other person's room, when there shouldn't have been anyone there. And no, it wasn't the cockroaches, though we did find some gnarly big boys dead in the bathroom. The third building was one in which a couple of friends lived. They both did not know each other, but confided to me separately that they had eerily similar dreams of something that lived in the walls and would tap against them. Both of them claimed to have seen shadows moving around their room. So one of the buildings that I worked out of was the only remaining wing of what had been, back in the day, the Naval Hospital Pearl Harbor. Way back when it was first constructed. It was this huge building with 2 long wings several stories high and a gnarly basement. Now it's just one dilapidated building in a parking lot. Knowing that it was a hospital in Pearl Harbor, I'm sure you can piece together the history. But let me elaborate. During the attack on Pearl Harbor, it was used as triage and as a morgue. Several hundred bodies were brought there within the first several hours alone, for later identification and burial. 960 casualties passed through on that one day. And fast forward to now, there is a 24/7 watch stood up in the building, and that includes the usual stuff, sitting at the desk, answering phones, going on roves, which is all well and good until it's after hours, and only you and a few other people are left in the building, and you're the sad little E3, E4 who has to rove alone. You'd be the only one in that specific part of the building, and would hear footsteps, muffled voices, and get really uncomfortable feelings of being watched. People complained about getting their hair tugged in the basement. In the hour span between 2 roves, I once had the shower in the basement male locker room turn on. I heard voices, disembodied coughing, the footsteps, cold spots in weird places, a horrible feeling of being watched, and after that I never used a specific drinking fountain, and I found out later that it was a problem area, and a lot of people had a similar feeling too. There was also the time that I was locked in the bathroom by a phantom. That was fun. There are also some buildings on Ford Island, which are definitely creepy. I think what makes it worse is that they are abandoned, and a lot of the buildings still have damage that was never repaired. Though I have to say the spookiest thing that happened to me on Ford Island was when my dad visited. We were driving around and he insisted on stepping out of the car near the brig, you know, for the photo op. Our buildings were haunted. Now I say buildings and not building, because I managed to spend minimum 1 night in every barracks at basic training, due to a string of really unfortunate injuries that have nothing to do with this story. We heard voices during lights out. You could hear someone going up and down the central stairway. It was 3 stories, and it would echo like hell. Upon inspection, there was nothing out there. Our stuff would also move about. One of the lads had his inspection out on an empty bed, and by morning it had all been thrown around the room. I would have suspected our corporals, but normally the damage was localized within your specific area. This was all over the room. I've got to say the weirdest one for me was when I saw a guy walking up the stairs as I was coming back from a smoke at 2 a.m. I called out to him and ran up to catch him up, and he just vanished. No doors open, nothing, just simply gone. I didn't recognize them, and they didn't have the standard number 2 all over haircut, so it definitely wasn't one of our lads. Who knows? This happened to my dad a number of years ago. He has since passed away, but this story is one that I always remember in my mind as being the one that gave him the most chills. He didn't tell it often, but when he did, and it usually required alcohol for him to do so, it would always give him a look that I rarely ever saw in him. A true and profound fear that we as a family rarely ever saw, and a particular vulnerability that was very unlike my father. But now, onto the story. My dad was working in the army. I can't say where, I don't know if I can now. In any case, he never said specifically where. This must have been at least 50 years ago. He was on patrol on some rural area of the base. He was led to believe and understand that the area had previously been somewhat inhabited. The land was repurposed as a base, and the subsequent houses in the rural vicinity were either destroyed or just left. I think there were about 3 houses that were in the woods which were already overgrown and abandoned by the time the base was got, where it was considered too much work to go about bringing them down. So they were left there, as edicts to what came before. My dad was doing a patrol one night in the dark. He said it must have been past midnight, and he was by himself, on a little vehicle, making sure that everything was in order. He was relatively bored and just listening to the sound of nature, when suddenly he spots something out in the woods. He jumps off his vehicle and shines a flashlight towards the woods, where he clearly sees something move. He radios in to say that he's seen movement, and he starts making his way closer. He sees and hears footsteps and movement, the swish of a robe, it seems. My dad walks near to one of these old houses, and he illuminates the house. He doesn't see anyone inside, but now the intruder or person is gone. He makes his way towards the house, which he had never done before, and is feeling a bit apprehensive. Even though theoretically there should be no one there, it still gives him the creeps. He opens the door, which was unlocked, and shouts out to reveal themselves and that they were trespassing. But there is no noise whatsoever. He looks around the house, the musty smell invading his nose and his ears only being filled with the footsteps he himself makes in this sinister house. It's very small. He clears every room downstairs and starts making his way up these thin, rickety wooden steps, which he was dubious would hold his weight, but he needed to do a thorough inspection, as protocol demanded. When he reached the top of the stairs, he noticed there were 3 small rooms. He went into each of them in turn, and upon the last room, saw a small ladder and an attic leading up to it. He had a really bad feeling. The hairs on the back of his neck were standing on end, and he really didn't want to go up those stairs. But he knew he must. So, up he went. One of the stair rungs actually broke under his feet on his way up, which nearly gave him a heart attack, but he soldiered on. When he made it to the top, he shined his flashlight all around, and as expected, heard and saw nothing. Just a few old children's toys and sheets and stuff, nothing of real interest. He did see something though. Maybe there could be someone hidden behind the sheet. The attic was quite small, and so he made his way in and pulled back the sheet to reveal nothing. Satisfied with his search, he made his way back down out of the house. He hadn't got any response via radio yet, which he thought was odd, but brushed it off and made his way back to the vehicle. Just as the keys were entering the ignition, did he hear something again? He looked over and swore he saw a shadow move. He shined his flashlight in the general direction and saw that again it was heading towards the house. This time he ran, convinced he was going to catch whatever or whoever it was. He ran, but when he reached the house, it was gone. He used his flashlight to shine all around the house, not wanting or thinking he should go in, seeing as the door hadn't made a sound as it squeaked like hell the first time he entered. When he'd pretty much done a whole lap of the house, he decided to give it up. He wasn't sure what it was, and thought that it would be best to leave this to someone else. Just as he was rounding the house to go towards his vehicle, did he hear a light tap on the glass of one of the windows. He knew something bad was about to happen. He said he could feel a distinct chill in the air as he twisted his head slowly, and his eyes saw red eyes in the window. It wasn't so much the eyes themselves, but the dark shadow of what appeared to be a body, absolutely towering over him. It was behind the window, at least 8 feet tall. As you imagine, my dad promptly crapped himself and ran as fast as he could to the vehicle, and drove all the way back. He told absolutely no one this story. It took him a number of years before he even shared it with us. But a few years after, while out with a few drinks with a few colleagues of his, did one of them bring up the abandoned properties. They asked the usual questions about if anyone had been in one, and my dad piped up. He said he thought he once saw something while doing an inspection, but it turned out to be nothing. One of the members of the group went silent, and then asked, "Did you see the eyes? Were they red?" The others in the group didn't know what they were talking about. Something in the house, perhaps? And my dad looked him square in the eyes and just nodded. The nod was so much more than a nod, charged with comprehension and understanding that they had shared in the same disturbing experience. They never spoke any more about it, but my dad admits that it was something truly disturbing, and never inspected any abandoned properties again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. A truly chilling set of tales. If you enjoyed these stories or have any that you would wish to share, feel free to send me an email or follow the link in the description. I'd like to thank everyone who gave me permission to narrate these, and to all my members and patrons. You guys really do mean the world to me, so thank you. The video was a lot of fun to make. Really fun researching and going through the threads and listening and reading all the individual accounts. You know, sometimes